Oh boy, I really didn't intend to go this long between ReSliders episodes. Sorry about that, everybody, but better late than never, right? Hello, everyone. I'm Matt Mitrovich, the alternate historian, and welcome back to ReSliders, my recap of the 90s alternate history TV show Sliders. And today we're covering the episode Summer of Love. Just a reminder, I'm reviewing these episodes in their story order rather than their premiere order. I actually forgot I made this rule for myself and watched the episode Fever first, which involves the Sliders visiting an Earth struck by a horrible plague that is destroying civilization. Yeah, probably a good idea to not review that episode at the time of recording, but enough stalling, let's get this review started. When we last saw our heroes, they learned that they hadn't returned to their home timeline, i.e. Earth Prime, but instead had landed in a timeline where Quinn's dad, who passed away on Earth Prime, is still alive. There's no resolution to this cliffhanger as we see them in a new timeline when the episode starts. Sure, the fact that they weren't on Earth Prime, coupled with other changes, might have convinced them to keep sliding, but it would have been interesting to see the conflict Quinn would feel when given the option of being with his dad again. But alas, that's not what we got. Instead, we got an episode that honestly wasn't that good. The episode begins on Earth Prime where we see the FBI grab Quinn's friend, Conrad Benish, and take him to Quinn's basement. There, the FBI tells him the 4 sliders have been missing, and they also show him a videotape of Quinn saying that just yesterday he had been discussing the Einstein-Rosen-Podolsky Bridge with Conrad and that he actually crossed it. Conrad quickly realizes that the sliders have traveled to a parallel Earth. Quick side note, according to the website Earth Prime, this guy, Bob Lee, who plays Agent Harold Yen, was dubbed in the final cut of the episode so he would sound less American. How do you even justify such a change like that? Would Americans really be confused if they heard an Asian man not talking with an Asian accent? Yikes! Anywho, cut to the sliders exiting the vortex into a deserted San Francisco. A TV says that spider wasps that were bred for pest control have escaped a lab in Venezuela and are about to swarm over the city. Quinn reopens the vortex despite his objections the timer has not yet finished counting down and thus may not have enough power for them to slide. Nevertheless, he opens the vortex, Rembrandt and Wade go first, but then the vortex closes, forcing Quinn to reopen it so he and Arturo could slide next. Unfortunately, we don't know much about Swarm Earth, but its history reminds me of the killer bee craze of the early 90s, which was blown out of proportion. Also, as a FYI, there was a scene that would have explained how the timer worked. In summary, when the sliders land in an alternate timeline, they have a random amount of time before their next window of opportunity to slide again. If they miss it, their next chance would be in 29.7 years. Because Summer of Love was shown out of order by the network, this scene had to be cut, otherwise it wouldn't make sense about why the sliders were just learning about this now. Moving right along, when Wade and Rembrandt exit without Quinn and Arturo, they believe they are now stuck on this alternate timeline. A group of hippies see them exit the vortex, however, and assume they must be alien gods or something because, haha, smelly hippies are dumb. Anywho, Wade and Rembrandt quiz them about their history and are disappointed to learn Oliver North is president. But to be fair, I'd be disappointed too if I lived in a timeline where Americans were dumb enough to elect a guy behind the Iran-Contra affair. Quinn and Arturo exit the vortex, not realizing they're on the same timeline, which I'm going to call Hippie Earth, as Wade and Rembrandt. Unfortunately, a spider wasp followed them and landed on Arturo's back. Quinn, claiming he was a high school quarterback, throws a rock at it, but instead hits Arturo's head. Luckily, Quinn got a multicolored headband to cover Arturo's wound, much to Arturo's annoyance, who is upset that they are in a version of the 90s that looks a lot like the 60s, due in part to a war protest happening nearby about a war in Australia, prompting Arturo to say,
I hated the 60s when it was the 60s.
You know, now that I think about it, I don't think we ever saw them kill the spider wasp. Did Quinn just doom another Earth to the spider wasp swarm? Dick move, Quinn. Meanwhile, Rembrandt borrows a car from the hippies, who all turn out to be rich because we need to fit in more cliches about the 60s counterculture movement, but more on that later. He decides to visit the house that he grew up in, where he sees they're having a funeral for Rembrandt's doppelganger, who died in the war. During the eulogy, his doppelganger's brother criticizes Rembrandt, and even goes as far as to claim he's a better singer than Rembrandt. Angry that anyone would dare criticize his singing, Rembrandt jumps out to defend his honor, causing the guests to believe their Rembrandt is alive. Rembrandt then learns he is married to Sharon, a woman he once had a crush on in his timeline, and they had a son, Rembrandt Jr., who is played by the older brother from My Brother and Me. Just a little trivia for anyone besides me who remembers that Nickelodeon show from the 90s. Anywho, still believing he is stuck on this timeline, Rembrandt decides to assume his deceased doppelganger's life. Returning to Quinn and Arturo, they rent a room for the night where they intend to fix the timer. While there, Quinn learns the point of divergence for this alternate timeline. Turns out that during World War II, the U.S. lost a battle of the Coral Sea, leading to a successful Japanese invasion of Australia. Japan is still ultimately defeated, but Australia is liberated with the help of the Soviet Union, who established a communist North Australia, while America props up the capitalist South Australia, mirroring the creation of North and South Vietnam in our timeline. First, another Cold War-era divergence right after the pilot is repetitive. Second, what? I don't think a Japanese victory at the Battle of the Coral Sea would necessarily end with a Japanese invasion and occupation of Australia. Mark Grimsley published an article in 2008 for the World War II magazine where he discussed this particular point of divergence. In summary, he believes that while a Japanese victory would have thrown a monkey wrench into Allied plans, at best it would only delay Japan's ultimate defeat by a few months. Meanwhile, there's the whole other issue of just how the Russians got to Australia. I don't know who needs to hear this, but the Soviet Union isn't anywhere close to Australia, and they weren't exactly a naval power in the Pacific in the 1940s. Sure, the Soviets did intervene in the Pacific War in 1945 by invading Japanese-controlled Manchuria, and there were plans for the Soviets to invade Hokkaido before the nuclear bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki made that moot, but in general, the Soviets didn't invade anywhere they couldn't walk to. So plausibility wasn't that important in the Sliders writer's room, and to be fair, I'm okay with that. This show is made for a general audience, so things like logistics, geography, or, well, logic don't matter as much as a good story. But whether this is a good story remains to be seen. Getting back to the episode, due to sitcom-level hijinks, the landlord becomes suspicious of Quinn and Arturo, so she calls the FBI and tells them that they are planning to assassinate the president. They believe her, presumably because the FBI in this alternate timeline never has to deal with crank calls or crazy people. So the doppelgangers of the FBI agents we saw earlier in the episode on Earth Prime show up to detain and question Quinn and Arturo. Meanwhile, it turns out Sharon is an abusive spouse, which is regrettably played for last, with Rembrandt being told,
"No man on earth is as whipped as you."
This makes the entire Rembrandt storyline exceedingly uncomfortable, and is one of the reasons why I did not like this episode. We get some relief, however, when Rembrandt Jr. shows Rembrandt a telegram confirming that the other Rembrandt, God, it's a lot of Rembrandts, is still alive and was recently rescued from the outback Kong. Sharon tries to murder our Rembrandt, forcing him to flee. On his way back to Wade and the hippies, Rembrandt drives past the building where Quinn and Arturo are being held. Quinn sees Rembrandt outside the window, and both escape the FBI with Rembrandt. Also, Outback Kong seems to suggest the Vietnam War still happened in this timeline. So, has America just been fighting the same war over and over again and learning zero lessons? Okay, Sliders, I'll admit, that's plausible. Our three heroes return to the hippie commune, where Wade, who really hasn't done much this episode, is telling them her opinions on the war. Arturo chastises her for getting involved, but Wade argues there is nothing wrong with helping the Earths they visit. Who is right is hard to say. On one hand, I think it's arrogant of Wade to assume she understands enough about what the situation is to make an informed opinion about what this or any other Earth needs, which means her involvement could have unforeseen consequences that could get people hurt or killed. On the other hand, it's heartless of Arturo to assume the best course of action is always non-intervention. There is nothing wrong with being a good Samaritan, and when you can provide an idea or invention that an Earth desperately needs, like life-saving medicine, to spoil an upcoming episode, then some may say you have a duty to intervene. Ultimately, the best answer is, it depends. Every Earth is different, and the Sliders will need to use their best judgment as they go along. In fact, this battle between intervention and non-intervention might make for an interesting theme, but will the show follow through? Well, we'll find out together. Anywho, the FBI shows up just as the Sliders are leaving, and wait, hold on a second. Do these hippies have the Starbucks logo on their foreheads? Does Starbucks lead the counterculture movement in this alternate timeline? I have so many questions. Moving right along, they land in an abandoned San Francisco, but this one has an ominous roar coming from the west. When the Sliders turn the corner, they see a giant wave rising over the buildings. The episode ends with Rembrandt revealing that he can't swim. Spoiler alert, they survive this, but you probably already assumed that. Anywho, here are my final thoughts. Summer of Love seems to be well regarded among the Sliders fandom, with the Earth Prime website giving it an A-, but personally, I didn't like it. Part of the reason is the Rembrandt storyline. I know women are more likely to be in abusive relationships, but it can happen to men too, and to see it excused as Rembrandt simply being whipped is just poor taste. On top of that, the scenes with the hippies were just annoying. I'm not exactly a fan of the 60s counterculture movement, but hippies as rich kids who just got high all the time is just an old cliche. In reality, the counterculture movement cast a wide net and brought in diverse groups of people who protested the Vietnam War, campaigned for civil rights, warned people about the dangers of nuclear conflict, and questioned traditional attitudes towards sex, homosexuality, and women's role in society. And yes, there were drugs, and there were plenty of legitimate criticisms of the movement, such as how the concept of free love still emphasized the sexual desires of men over women. But is any cultural movement throughout history ever perfect? Of course not, but we need to study the good and the bad, though, before passing judgment on it as a whole. And as for Summer Love, rather than give us a nuanced look at a timeline where such a movement was delayed until 30 years later, we get, ha ha ha, let's laugh at the stupid hippies. Perhaps I'm being too harsh on a 90s sci-fi show, but even as a kid I remember not liking this episode. So I hate to say it, but maybe Fox was right in airing this episode out of order. That said, I know there are some gems in these earlier seasons of Sliders, so things will improve. In the meantime, what did you think about Summer Love? Feel free to let me know. Well, that is what to say in this subject. If you enjoy what I do, please like, comment, subscribe, share this video, support me on Patreon. I'm Matt Mitrovich, the Alternate Historian. Bye.